when I asked him to do this particular talk.
He lies.
I've known Bernard for a long time we're both in education, but we both did voluntary and other youth work together, so that's how we came to know each other a long time ago. In fact, it is a long time ago, because one of the ladies who we also knew through Youth Leaders Council will be 98 years old on Friday. So it has been a long time. Though he doesn't look anything like 98, I have to admit.
Thank you very much for those kind words.
Anyway, Bernard is going to speak to us, and he's going to bring his take on his life in 5 objects and 2 songs. So please welcome Mr. Bernard Carney.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Have you cut your hearing aid set properly? Okay, well, I'll begin then. A dash through the decades. Hello. My first recollection of actually being is sometime between autumn 1941 and spring 1942. I was born on the 11th of July 1940 at 81 Queensgate in Bolton. On the 20th of August 1941, some 13 months later, we all moved to number 4 Malvern Avenue. Malvern Avenue is between Brighton Avenue and Devonshire Road. Devonshire Road is a very long, steep road. Pat, Jim and Michael are my older siblings. Mary, Eileen and Terry, my younger siblings. Jim died on the 15th of March 2019. Michael on the 1st of November 2022. We are 7. I have chosen a poem as my first item. William Wordsworth was advised not to publish it under his real name, as it was considered too childish. He did anyway, and I am glad that he did. I recommend it to you. It is called We Are 7. The poem describes a discussion between an adult poetic speaker and a little cottage girl about the number of brothers and sisters she has. The poem presents the question of whether or not to regard dead siblings as part of the family. It is a question I hope you have noticed I have already answered, so I will let you look it up and read it. You will not regret it, but you might need a tissue. The details are on the screen. Any older locals here might recognize some of the family names that come to my mind as I think about when we were brought up around Malvern Avenue in the 1940s. There were Winstanleys, Unsworths, Simpsons, Farrells, Rileys, Ashtons, Greenhalghs, Turners, Rothwells, Murrays, Hills, Morans, Blackburns, Morrises, Higgins, Masons, Burns, Ridsdales, O'Neills, Dewhursts, and Carneys. I always felt that I belonged in one great diverse community. Dad, James Carney, and Mum, Beatrice Magdalen Dewhurst, were brilliant. They married on the 30th of June, 1934. They married at St Edmund's Catholic Church in Bolton. Father, later Canon Crinell, officiated. I don't recall much of my first 3 years, so I think that 1943 is a better year for me to start this dash through the decades. Not only is it tidier, it is also anniversary rich, to as far back as 1923 for football and royalty, and more recently, my life events that led me to do some of the things I have done and be the person I am. First, though, my recollection of being. I recall sitting in a very nice pram at the front of Malvern Avenue, looking at this lad, also in a pram, who never moved. He didn't do anything. I wondered why. Not until much later did I realize he was nearly a year younger than me. As I had only just turned 1 at the time, it wasn't really so surprising. He was Philip Byrne. his mum and dad, Wilf and May, and my mum and dad were big friends. Wilf and my dad were always at work, every day. My mum and May were always at home, and my only thought was, when will my dad be coming back home? I subsequently learned that every day Dad walked the length of Devonshire Road twice for the bus to and from his place of work, the de Havilland Aircraft Factory in Lostock. Now, this recollection was embedded into my psyche over 2 or 3 years. It happened 6 days a week, every week. 5.5-day working week was usual then, and sometimes 7 days of work was required. Dad and Mum have always been my heroes, even before I understood the concept. I could not believe that people, all of us, who belonged together, had to spend so much time away from each other. Furthermore, I couldn't believe that this Wonder Woman, my mother, was left to do all the work, whilst my dad was only with us for, at most, 1 full day a week. And that was Sunday. Sunday was also the day when we always went to this place I came to know and love, church. Sunday thus was very special. We went to church together and we were all at home together. 1 day per week seemed so unfair. I didn't know the half of it. There was a war on. In 1943, 3-year-old children got to go to pre-nursery class. It was part of the war effort to allow women to go to work. So after Easter 1943, I was taken to St. Edmund's all-age school. What a place, I thought. The classroom was full of beds, complete with blanket and pillow. Very soon I was there, in bed, thinking, wow, this isn't bad, is it? Better still, the teacher was Mrs. Moran, another friend of Mum. She was also always in our house, and in our house was always nice to me. This initial lying in bed session didn't last long. As soon as we had all been welcomed, recorded, and shown to our allotted bed for the daily after-lunch sleep, and parents had left, Mrs. Moran told us we could get out of bed and play in the play corner. I thought, this is getting better and better. Well, it did and it didn't. Mrs. Moran was both gentle and strict. When she thought a child was being naughty, or maybe she did this as a deterrent, she was easily persuaded to use her ruler, but not for measuring. She used to slap some unfortunate on the legs, and I can tell you, it hurt. I couldn't believe it. What had been done? My mum's friend had hit someone. For what? She'd even hit me. What had I done? This place wasn't always wonderful. Why? After Mrs. Moran came Miss Murray, Mr. Wood, Mr. Daly and Miss Byrne, in that order, all of them well-established teachers. Apart from Mr. Daly, he had recently returned from forces duty in the Royal Air Force, and that would be about 1945. It appeared to me that all teachers seemed to run hot and cold, and consequently, I was never certain if I was doing right or doing wrong. For me, this didn't fit in with telling God how much we loved him and then learning about how much he loved us. It was so confusing that sometimes I wondered how and if God really knew everything. So I move on to song number 1. I see this song as a prayer. It was intended as such by the composer, Dolly Parton. She wrote it on the day after the 9/11 terror attack in the USA. Though that was in 2001, I introduce it now because, especially as I approached the dreaded 11+, I felt just the same as the words and observations of this prayer. I think it is brilliant. It's brilliant for the 1940s, for 2001, and I think for all time. It is called Hello God.
Hello, God. Are you out there? Can you hear me? Are you listening anymore? Hello, God. If we're still on speaking terms, can you help me like before? I've questioned your existence. My resistance leaves me cold. Can you help me go the distance? Hello, God. Hello, hello. Oh, this old world has gone to pieces. Can we fix it? Is there time? Hate and violence just increases. We're so selfish, cruel and blind. We fight and kill each other in your name, defending you. Do you love some more than others? We're so lost and confused. Hello, God. Are you out there? Can you hear us? Are you listening anymore? Hello, God. If we're still on speaking terms, can you help us like before? Oh, the free will you have given, we have made a mockery of. This is no way to be living. We're in great need of your love. Hello, God. Hello, God. Can you grant us love enough to start again? Hello, God. Is there still a chance that we can make amends? Hello, God. We've learned our lesson. Oh, God, don't let us go. Hello, God. Now more than ever. Hello, God. Hello, 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 God. We really need you. We can't make it without you. Hello, God. We beseech you in the name of all that's true. Hello, God. Please forgive us, for we know not what we do. Hello, God. Give us one more chance to prove ourselves to you. Hello, God. Hello, God. Hello, God. Hello, God.
I think it's brilliant. I hope you like it. Incidentally, I had a very happy time at infant and junior school. I thought school was a great place, somewhere to enjoy new things every day. It may be that I should have worked harder at tasks set before me, but no, I just did what I thought was enough in order to enjoy school, church, and the family life I felt so fortunate to have and be part of. I thought everyone was so lucky. That turned out to be a tad naive. I came to realize that the world was not always fair. For many it was, and still is, grossly unfair. Talking of which, the 11 plus. Pat and Jim had passed it, but Michael hadn't. That was odd. Michael never struck me as being anything less than Jim, nor Pat for that matter. When I didn't pass the 11 plus, I was very upset and believed that something was wrong. I believed that Michael was clever and he hadn't gone to grammar school, to Thornlea. I knew that Pat and Jim were clever. They had gone to grammar school. But so too had John Loss. Now, that's not his real name. John was in my class, and I knew for certain that he wasn't clever. He was, as the saying used to go, as thick as a plank. The system was flawed, and I needed to do something about it for me. Of the regular modes of prayer, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication, it was the latter that I used most, especially at this time. And boy, did it work. The answer came in the form of, and the pun is intended, Mr. John Vincent Holborn. JVH was the senior one boys class teacher. He suggested that Michael Daniels, my best friend, and I might be able to sit the 13 plus exam for the new technical school at age 12. Our parents agreed, the school did, and we did. Incredibly, the scholarship was not even offered for 1954 entry. We took the exam, we passed it, and we got into the tech a year early. It was a brilliant school for both of us, made possible because Mr. Holborn, he had gone out on a limb with this unorthodox suggestion. Michael, my elder brother, was one of the 13 plus students who also passed, and so off to the tech in 1953, in spite, or maybe even because, of the poor and random provision of secondary education at that time. Incidentally, it still continues to be pretty random. Interestingly, in my early career, I helped to confirm with other researchers and educational psychologists the foolishness of claiming to be able to predict at age 11 which individual child would be best suited to a grammar school and which child should be kept occupied until they could be directed to local workplaces, to work that was, by definition, wrong, local and thus suitable. Not only was it foolish, there is clear evidence that much of the research claiming to support the implementation of the 1944 Education Act via a continuation and development of the 11 plus tests was based upon false variance statistics. In other words, the figures were fixed. Gavin Williamson made a similar and very damaging algorithmic mistake for thousands of students during COVID, but not as many were affected in the COVID as were who were seen as being 11 plus failures. My great fortune was to go to the new secondary technical school in September 1953 with my brother Michael Daniels, and 117 others. We assembled in the Great Hall on Manchester Road. It certainly changed my life. Before going to the tech, though, I move on to object number 2. This is an anniversary photo. In 1953, what was that? Coronation year. But it's not about that. Football then. Ah, yes. The Stanley Matthews final. No, it's not that either. In Bolton, we don't talk about that game. But it is football. It was a game that also changed my life. This match, though, is much nearer to home. It was on Burnden Park, and it was a cup final. It was the George Fell Cup final of the Bolton School's football knockout competition, and it was between St. Peter and Paul and St. Edmunds. We had beaten Holy Infants in the semi-finals. That was totally unexpected. Holy Infants, they should have beaten us like nothing else. Holy Infants had Danny Ramsden in midfield, and he was a town team star. I played outside right, and I had just been unsuccessful in a trial for the town team junior Colts. Looking at our team, there is, from back left to front right in the photo, Tommy Leach, me, David Smith, Bernard Williams, Michael, my brother, Jack Riley, Peter Craven, Colin Webster, Joe Morris, Brian Bage, Richard Webster, and Michael Gilday. If you recognize any of us in the photo, I've asked Mary to just hand out a photo with a thumbnail sketch of each of them. Time, though, suggests that I keep moving on, whatever you do with that. I will, however, mention Jack Riley, Bernard Williams, and Michael Gilday. Michael Gilday was a better footballer than I ever was, but he was ill for the semi-final, as was Bernard Williams. As we had unexpectedly won the semi-final, Jim Sykes, the senior two boys teacher and football coach, and later the head teacher of St Edmunds, decided we should, in his words, stick with a winning team for the final. Jack Riley in goal for Bernard Williams and me at outside right for Michael Gilday. I walked onto the hallowed grass that was Burnden Park, and the pitch was enormous. As we were playing the first half towards the railway end, I had to walk across this massive field. Making this hike, I couldn't help but notice that the St. Peter and Paul's team was made up of real giants. I was still 12, they were all 14 or 15. Playing as outside left for them was one of the more diminutive team members, a lad called Brian Riley. He had a nickname called Hank. Brian had a ball, pardon the pun there, telling me that their giant centre forward was very aptly named. His name was Ronnie Hardman. I looked at Ronnie and believed Brian. At half-time, losing 6-0, our head teacher, Mr. Ted Fithian, visited the changing room to lift spirits, I think, telling us that the game wasn't over until the last whistle. We all looked at Mr. Fithian and we didn't believe. The following week, the Bolton Evening News actually wrote, unusually, a commentary on the two teams in the George Fell Cup final, stating that St Edmunds were gallant losers against a much bigger and more mature team of footballers, adding that had John Riley not played so well, the 12 goals to none score that it was would have been doubled, and therefore John Riley was his man of the match. Yes, if you've done your sums, we lost 12-0. I didn't play football again, for team football that is, for 5 years, and I decided there and then that public performance should always be preceded by private practice. Just as a footnote, in his memoirs, Roy Hartle tells of the baptism of fire he gave to Hank Riley in training when he first played for Bolton Wanderers. Nat Lofthouse called him Twinkle Toes. Brian became a very successful footballer until injury cut his career short. Sadly, by the time he was 80 in 2017, he had dementia, and he died in October of that year. Object number 3, I have called it Any Suggestions. In the decade of 1963, there are many things that happened and affected me in my life, some more than others, of course. For each, I could easily choose a notable object. I have decided not to, but I have some suggestions. After the excitement and subsequent trauma of the George Fell Cup final, I left the all-age school and moved to the new secondary technical school. What follows is a short list of a much longer one that could provide me with object number 3. 3A, first assembly in the Great Hall. The head teacher welcomed us to this new school experience, telling us to stay out of trouble. He said, "I wish you all good fortune. However, I will call the police if I think the law has been broken by any of you, and I will not oppose prosecution." The suggested object there is alarm bells. It frightened me anyway. 1 year in, Miss Pierpont arrived to teach us history. She was surprised to find out whose brother I was. She knocked me out, or kicked me out I should say, Michael Daniels and myself, out of history. You can do geography with Mr. Pearson. The object there would definitely be exercise books and what I did to Miss Pierpont with them. My sister Patricia is a nun. 3 years in, I took the 7 GCSEs that we were told we were taking and enjoyed a celebratory day trip to Southport the day after exams had finished. Michael and I, my best friend, we both passed 6 of the 7 we could take. Michael passed chemistry, but not metalwork. I failed chemistry. Our day out coincided with the Northwest Region's Head Teachers Conference. Guess who we met on the promenade? The object there is definitely a cane. And it didn't work, but it hurt. 4 years in September, impressed and pleased that Miss Pierpont took the trouble to attend the school prize giving in the Victoria Hall in order to see and congratulate Elizabeth Beswick and myself. And she insisted that she included me in the reason why she came, upon receiving our A-level certificates. Elizabeth and I were the only students in the 6th form of Bolton Technical School that year. And we both completed our respective 2-year A-level courses in 1 year and without any taught lessons. Sounds a bit like COVID, doesn't it? So, should any of you like to know the backstory to any of these suggested objects, just ask and I can oblige you sometime or other. Object number 4, a license to teach. Following my secondary school career, I worked for 6 months as an apprentice joiner. I was called an apprentice joiner so that Mr. Price, the owner of the firm on Chorley Old Road next to the Crofters, McGee Marshalls, could actually give me some money. We both knew that we were never intended to be a joiner. Driving to Horwich each day, I always smile at the large timber double garage that I helped to build in 1957. It's still there and still in full use. I was very pleased about that. For a further 3 months each, I worked at Signet Joinery on Swan Lane, and then as a full-time bus conductor with Ribble buses to raise money to supplement the grant to go to Shoreditch College of Higher Education, where I qualified as a specialist craft design teacher, a general subjects teacher, and in spare time while I was at that place, a specialist PE teacher for secondary schools. But all of that was not until I had spent 1 year's experience as an unqualified craft teacher, where in my first posting with my younger brother in the same class that I was teaching. He was always in my hair. Also in this decade, I was leader of a ballroom dancing youth club. Can you imagine that? Strictly Come Dancing in those days. It was called St. Edmund's Youth. But moving with the times, we started to allow jiving and bopping during the half-hour tea break when the top 10 chart records played. For the rest of the evening, it was strict Victor Sylvester. Do you remember Victor Sylvester? Well, he was played all night apart from that half hour. It was here in 1959 that I first encountered Margaret. I told her that jiving had finished and it was now back to ballroom dancing. Margaret said, "That's silly." She did stop jiving though, and then, along with the 20 or 30 young people from Farnworth, she left the building. Fast forward now to Easter 1962, a midweek evening at the Astoria Palais de Danse. For those of you who are not aware, that's Bolton Palais. I was looking down from the balcony and saw this stunningly beautiful young lady. I thought I really should pluck up the courage to ask her for a dance. She was with a group of others, and as I approached, I realized that I was walking towards the young lady I had spoken to 2 years earlier. I decided to keep going, ask her anyway, and hope she didn't remember me. She did. But she did agree to dance anyway, and more than once. When I asked her if I could take her home, she said no, but you can walk with me to the bus stop. We got engaged in Easter 1963 and married on the 27th of June 1964. By 1964 then, if not my career and my family, my life, and that's what this talk is, was complete. It remained so for the next 51 years. I feel blessed to have experienced it. It remains very special and personal to me. My prayers were always about worship and appreciation, rather than any pleading. They are memories I mainly keep to myself and share with my family. So, with your permission, I'm going to skip up to date career-wise. I became the craft design departmental lead in the UK, then a year in Sleepy Hollow in the USA, doing exactly the same work for the Americans who wanted to change their workshop techniques, that they called it, into a more rounded curriculum area. I did further part-time study and became a local authority youth tutor. After my first degree in sociology and a master's in sociological research, I became principal lecturer at De La Salle College of Higher Education. With De La Salle College under threat, I became Sefton's general advisor, education advisor. From there to the Home Office as senior principal advisor for the Northwest. Then, by invite, I worked for Cheshire County Council, North Wales Training and Enterprise Council, Warrington District Council, and Enterprise PLC. In 2000, I became Bolton's Adult Learning Manager. I retired 3 times. We went to 2 Royal Garden parties. From 2007, I kept busy with odd jobs, mainly with local authorities in trouble. For over 30 years, Margaret and I ran a real youth club. Let's go then to 2013. In 2013, I was diagnosed with CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, the blood cancer. At the same time, Margaret had agreed to be part of some skin research that a doctor at Heaton Medical Centre was leading. I should have been more awake. As a result of my diagnosis, we had done the sensible thing and got our affairs in order, both of us thinking that with cancer, it was me who was dying. No one looked after themselves as well, nor as completely as Margaret did, not only for herself, but also for me and our children, albeit them being 48, 46, 41, and 34 years old respectively at that time. In June 2014, Margaret went to the same doctor and told her that she had ovarian cancer. The doctor stated that she would tell her if she had cancer, if and when tests showed this to be the case. For 14 months, Margaret went to the Royal Bolton Hospital and to the surgery and to other places as directed for such tests as she was told would be appropriate. She went back to the surgery on many times to tell the experts that nothing was improving and that she still knew that she had ovarian cancer. In August 2015, following some further tests, Margaret went to the doctor again and was told, yes, you have got ovarian cancer. 20-some days later, Margaret died in Royal Bolton Hospital from ovarian cancer. I tell you this, not to seek some outpouring of sympathy from you to me, but to illustrate that life changes, sometimes without warning, sometimes, and criminally so, because the services and provisions that should universally be in place are not in place for all. And why is this? I believe I know a significant part of this why. It is both very simple and it is awful. Throughout time it has been and continues to be because of evil, greedy people seeking more wealth, more power, and more influence than they already have. One could be forgiven for asking why and how is it that a civilized country, one that claims to be based or bases its very existence upon Christian principles and teachings, allows so much disparity? Now, this isn't political. It is about being Christian. As Christians, shouldn't we ask why, in this United Kingdom, is both income and wealth more unequally distributed across the population than in any other G7 country, and has become more unequal year on year for many tens of decades? The numbers of those who have absolutely nothing and of those that are billionaires have both increased dramatically. Edmund Burke is quoted as saying, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." More of us are agreed that he actually did say, "Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little." I agree actually with both of those statements. I also believe it is as true today as it was when Burke made this observation in the mid-18th century, and pretty well for all time. And I have an example. It is object number 5. It is a virtual object. It is 3 books that changed a nation. A short time after Margaret died, I was on my way to Cornwall to visit a very sick colleague. I stopped off at Port Isaac, TV's Port Wen, at the Schoolhouse Hotel. My room number was number 1. It was called the Religious Studies Room. Margaret taught world religions at middle school for many years. That evening after dinner, I decided to have an early night and watch television. The program I saw is one I would recommend to anyone interested in history. It is called England's Reformation, 3 books that changed a nation. Eminent historian Janina Ramirez tells the story of these 3 books that defined the Reformation in England: Tyndale's New Testament, Cranmer's Book of Common Prayer, and Fox's Book of Martyrs. It is clear, it is objective, it is fascinating, and it is heartbreaking. In it, Janina makes an amazing claim. The Reformation need not have happened. She goes on to show that the reason it did had nothing to do with religion per se, but with cruel, greedy, evil and powerful people, mainly men, from all established and protesting Christian groups, who used religion not only to increase and or protect their own wealth, power and influence, but also to mobilize support of their own aspirational group and instill hatred and harm to those who, in good faith, question them, their doubts, beliefs, and their questions. Miss Ramirez states, all sides of the divide were culpable. I really do recommend it to you. It is an excellent historical documentary. It illustrates for me that nothing is ever as clear-cut as people claim, except, of course, for us as Christians, the one thing that is clear, the resurrection of Jesus, the fact upon which the whole of Christianity is built and depends. Song number 2 brings me to the end of this talk. Thank you for listening. All Christians agree about the song, and I hope you like it. It is sung, but was not written this time, by Dolly Parton, and is called He's Alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored to get to sing this song on the show tonight. And as Mama would say, I hope you get a blessing out of it. The gates and doors were barred and all the windows fastened down. I spent the night in sleeplessness and rose at every sound. Half in hopeless sorrow and half in fear the day would find the soldiers breaking through to drag us all away. And just before the sunrise, I heard something at the wall. The gate began to rattle and a voice began to call. So I hurried to the window, looked down into the streets, expecting swords and torches and the sound of soldiers' feet. But there was no one there but Mary, so I went down to let her in. John stood there beside me as she told me where she'd been. She said they've moved him in the night and none of us knows where. The stone's been rolled away and now his body isn't there. So we both ran toward the garden and John ran on ahead. We found the stone and empty tomb just the way that Mary said. But the winding sheet they wrapped him in was just an empty shell. And how or where they'd taken him was more than I could tell. Oh, but something strange had happened there, just what I did not know. John believed a miracle, but I just turned to go. Circumstance and speculation couldn't lift me very high, 'cause I'd seen them crucify him and I saw him die. Back inside the house again, the guilt and anguish came, and everything I'd promised him just added to my shame. When at last it came to choices, I denied I knew his name. And even if he was alive, it wouldn't be the same. Then suddenly the air was filled with a strange and sweet perfume. The light that came from everywhere drove shadows from the room. And Jesus stood before me with his arms held open wide. Then I fell down on my knees and I just clung to him and cried. Then he raised me to my feet, and as I looked into his eyes, the love was shining out from him like sunlight from the skies. Guilt and my confusion disappeared in sweet release, and every fear I'd ever had just melted into peace. He's alive!
Well, apart from saying thank you very much to Bernard for sharing so wonderfully aspects and a lot of the journey of his life, especially through his Christian connections and his faith, which has been wonderful. So thank you. But at the end of the day, what more can we say than what Dolly Parton's just been saying, and that's why we are here this evening, because he's alive. So praise the Lord. And thank you, Bernard.
You're welcome.
I wonder if we can just say the grace together. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore.
Amen.
Good night to you, and I wish you a safe journey home.
Thank you.